To all of you here in this room, and to all of you who have elected to join us via our global live stream, we are delighted that so many women have chosen to play their part in Take the Lead Day in 17 countries and over 127 cities. For those of you who are not here in this room today, I urge you to go to www.taketheleadday and download the Personal Power Plan. And while you are at it, text in capitals, Take the Lead to 41444 to support more events, tools, and opportunities for women like this one, and share with us how you're taking the lead today on social with the hashtag #TakeTheLead. Again, good afternoon. I find it wonderful that our topic this afternoon is about a fairy god boss. I like to think of Gloria Felt as my fairy god boss. I also like to think of someone else who is a presenter and a panelist today as a fairy god boss, and that is Patricia Russo from the Women's Campaign School at Yale. So this is the appropriate topic for me to be talking about with all of you this afternoon. My name is Carrie Gianjobi. I'm from Arizona, but I was born in New York. I'm a founding partner at Take the Lead, and today in Take the Lead's Powertopia Symposium, we've structured our workshops and panels around some of the key power tools that make up the heart of our Take the Lead organization. This panel tackles something fundamental to women's parity: knowing your own worth and getting what you deserve. Studies show repeatedly that women are too often penalized in their paychecks, and that differential between what they are paid and what their male colleagues are paid adds up to a staggering difference over a lifetime. Some say as much as $1 million. And to do that, you need to have something else: belief in your work and its value. The power tool this connects to is one of the first ones. Power tool number 2, define your own terms. First, before anyone else does. This means not only being the one to set the agenda, stepping up, and saying the first word, it also means understanding the language of power itself and taking it on in your own terms. In other words, not just embracing the rules of the game that have kept women out, but redefining that traditional model of power over to the more expansive, more inclusive power too. And it all starts with each one of us. Today, we welcome Georgene Huang, a woman obsessed with improving the workplace for women. She is the CEO and co-founder of Fairy God Boss, a marketplace where professional women looking for jobs, career advice, and the inside scoop on companies meet employers who believe in gender equality. Previously, she ran the enterprise business at Dow Jones and was a managing director at Bloomberg Ventures. She's a graduate of Cornell and Stanford Universities. Please help me welcome Georgene Huang, whose company Fairy God Boss helps women every day get the edge in their career searches. A company formed by women for women to get the inside scoop.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you. All right. I'd love to start with a show of hands of who likes to negotiate. Okay, some of us, that's great. Well, while I can't necessarily change all your minds in an hour, I would love at the end of this hour and this talk, which I hope is very interactive, so please feel free to jump in with questions and comments along the way. I'd love for you to walk away feeling a little bit better about negotiating, because it is such a core skill set, and I think of it as a muscle, something that you can practice and get better at. after this talk. So, who am I, first of all? My name's Georgene, and I started a company 2.5 years ago with my co-founder, Romy, when we both were executives at Dow Jones. One day I found myself unexpectedly looking for a job, and I was 2 months pregnant, which means a lot less visibly pregnant than I am at the moment. And I was going on all these job interviews, wanting to find out what was a company's maternity leave policy, and were there senior women in management, and what was the culture really like? Was it a FaceTime kind of place, or was it a place where flexible working was actually allowed? And I didn't have the guts to ask those questions straight on in an interview for fear of looking less than committed to my career. So, I turned to my personal network, I went online, and to my surprise, a lot of the job review sites out there just didn't seem to address my questions and concerns. So Fairy Godboss is a place where women come together, and the name is based on the idea that a fairy godboss is a woman who lifts another woman up, and we share information and crowdsource this kind of hard to get, public secret kind of stuff on our site. And one of the things that people always ask me, okay, so what do women say about their workplaces? We ask every woman who reviews her job, it's free and anonymous, to answer one of 15 different questions. And one of those questions I want to focus on today is, what advice would you give another woman thinking about joining your company? And it struck me that I'd say at least 15 to 20% of the time, women say things like, you have to negotiate when you come into this company because pay raises are few and far between. It gets harder to get promoted once you've been there a while. So you better ask for what you need up front. And I was struck by that and how important it was, and how this was not really, some cultures make it seem, if you read the reviews of different places, where it's easier to get what you want than other places. But nevertheless, it thought it was such an important thing that I started reading much, much more about negotiating and women negotiating, and there's a lot of crowdsourced advice about it on our site. So why are we talking about negotiating as a woman? This is one of these things that you want to believe that advice for men and women can be the same. But as Sheryl Sandberg says, she hates giving advice about negotiating to women because the advice isn't what ideally you would say. Unfortunately, for better or worse, women and men do negotiate differently. They negotiate typically less often than men. And one of the reasons is potentially a confidence gap. You may have heard that women sometimes approach negotiations about pay and promotion less confidently about men. But another reason is just completely rational, which is that women face a lot of gender bias and social norms about being perceived as being too aggressive or pushy when they negotiate. So it's not entirely crazy or a reflection of a lack of confidence when a woman doesn't negotiate. It's simply maybe because she feels that she'll be penalized for promoting herself or talking up her achievements. So what does that mean we should do? Well, first of all, you have to decide what you're going to negotiate for. And I think a lot of the focus of negotiation is on when you get a job offer. But what I'd like to say, remind all of us is that in our current jobs, many of us have annual pay performance reviews and self-assessments. And these are all times that we can negotiate. But even beyond these, once a year events, there are things that in our life change. We may have a family member fall ill and need more flexible work hours. We may simply think that, we want more responsibility, or we want a promotion because someone on our team left and now we're expected to shoulder more responsibility for the same pay and title. In our community, when women say that things are not fair at their company, they typically focus on promotion and equal pay. And so these are the two areas that I'd like to sort of zone in on in terms of negotiating strategies. Other things that women in our community talk a lot about is work-life balance. So typically when a woman says that she has great work-life balance at her company, she also rates her job satisfaction at her company pretty highly. So there's a direct relationship. It's probably common sense, but our data show that it really does matter. And so negotiating for things that improve your sense of work-life balance, whatever that means for you, is also a big thing to think about negotiating. What other things can you negotiate for? transportation benefits, more like life event benefits. Maybe a lot of women say, I'm not happy with the maternity leave that I'm being given at my company, if any. Is that really it? And I'm very surprised at how often women don't actually ask for more, despite whatever the company's official policy is. Stock and equity, if you work at a small company where that's offered, or a startup where that's appropriate. Perks and reimbursements are things that eat away at our monthly bills and matter a lot. So you can negotiate for things like student loans. When you get relocated, you can ask for more in your relocation package. Gym memberships. I think one of the things to think about when you take a negotiation 101 class, which I'm not unfortunately going to be able to cover all the topics here, is the concept of your best alternative to a negotiated offer. So once you've decided what it is that you're going to negotiate for, whether that's a promotion, a transportation benefit, longer parental leave, or a raise, you have to sit back and say to yourself, what is my best alternative if I don't get what I'm asking for? In some cases, it may be the status quo. In some cases, it may be that you're perfectly happy walking away from a job offer or a position or promotion if you get it. This is important to understand just so that you know what's really on the table and you don't walk into a negotiation just feeling like, I just don't want to enter a conflict of any kind. I mean, in some cases, you really don't have much of a downside if you don't get to an agreement. And so you have to really understand what your position of bargaining is. Anchoring is another concept that's really important in any negotiation. On Halloween this year, New York City became the first city in the country to ban employers from asking about your salary history. So if you went into an interview today, and you're with the hiring manager or the HR manager, and they ask you how much did you make in your last job, that's an illegal question. And I think one of the reasons for the passage of this law and other laws like it across the United States, it's being picked up in various cities and states, is that if you've historically been paid less than you feel that you're worth or was unfair, that anchoring effect of your prior salary continues dragging you down potentially in the future. And so anchoring is something that you can also use to your benefit. So if you are, for example, unhappy with how much you make today and you're going into a job offer or a situation where you're negotiating a number, start with a number that's maybe higher than you think you actually want to end up. That just sets the tone of the conversation differently. And even if you don't get it, you might get something, let's say you get 10% less than what you wanted. If you set your sights 20% higher than you initially expected, that's the power of anchoring. It just changes the tone of the conversation, and I think it can be used positively or negatively, and it's something that I think we don't often realize has the psychological impact it can. So, the logistics. Whatever it is that you've decided what you're going to ask for, then you have to do your research, because you're going to have to justify what it is that you're asking for. And I'm talking in huge generalities here, but if it's about salary, try to find out what the going rate for that role is, and then use your anchoring knowledge to set that number a little bit higher. You can use lots of publicly available resources. Fairy Godboss obviously crowdsourced salary information, but there's also salary information at Glassdoor, Indeed. There are government tables about what the ranges for different job titles can earn. You can ask, and now there's so many places you can go. Social media, you can ask friends. You just have to do your research. And if it's not about salary, you can also find information about benefits online in many different places. I'll tell you a personal anecdote. In my last job, I had a pretty big job, and so I was actually able to go through SEC filings and look at some of the people who had similar roles to me and look up what they were making. It was just publicly disclosed. That included the equity component of the compensation package as well. So depending on what kind of job you're looking at, you might have to go to some unusual places to find the data you're looking for. you have to have a script. I mean, you're welcome to try to wing something but typically you'll do better if you've, practiced this a few times. So whether that's in front of the mirror, with a friend, I think it really is like exercising a muscle. The more you practice at anything, the better you'll feel about it, the more naturally it will come, and you'll just walk in feeling and exuding more confidence, which I think is a big part of just feeling good about and better about negotiating. Timing's also important. So, don't catch your boss when they're hungry or out the door to a meeting, right? They say that you should really try to catch people when they're in a reasonable mood, and just use your common sense about this. And then, of course, just at some point, you got to pull the trigger and ask for it. So instead of you just all listening to me, I'm really interested in seeing, I think the best way to get better at anything in life is to practice a little bit. So I'd love to take the next 5 minutes, and each of you think about a time you've recently negotiated or wish you had, and sort of write down or think to yourself about what you did well and what you think you could have done a little bit better. And then after you've come up with this situation, turn to the person to your left or right and share that story with each other. And at the end of this 10 minutes, I'd love for a volunteer or two to come and share what they discussed they could do better so that the whole group can benefit from this. I'll start the clock now. All right. So, who would like to be the first brave volunteer to share an interesting tidbit or tip with the group about? Okay, great. Any tips or tricks that we learned? Bravo. Anybody else? Yes, in the front row.
That kind of touches on what we were just talking about, how you walk into a job interview or ask for a promotion and you are asking for a certain salary range. How do you know that you're not pricing yourself out of that job? You get a call, a preliminary interview, and it's, I want X amount of money, and they might just go, oh, well, not going to call her back.
Well, I think this is where it kind of comes down to what you think your best alternative is and how badly you want the job. I mean, first of all, I would typically try to defer compensation discussions until after you've been offered the position. I mean, so that's one way of dealing with the uncertainty of asking for too much. You don't need to talk about your salary expectations in the first job interview unless you're really not sure you're interested, unless the job gets to a certain number, the number that you have in mind. Typically, when I've interviewed hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, and whenever an interviewee asks me, well, what's the salary range, I think to myself, they're not really that interested, And so I guess conversely, if I were in the interviewee's shoes, I wouldn't really raise that question if I really wanted the job and thought that maybe price was going to be an issue until after I got more certainty or indicators that I might actually get the job.
So we work in advertising, and a lot of times it's through a headhunter, or Yufang here is freelance. So that conversation does come up, like almost in the initial conversation.
Yeah. And the recruiting agency, I assume, can you just flip the question back to them?
That's a great point.
I don't think it's gonna help because we usually do, and
they don't say anything.
And also, we already know, we are not asking more than what the men make. But the problem is that I'm asking as a woman, right? It's always I think there is a question here. Is can I ask for the same salary that men is making right now? Because I know for sure that's what they're making.
Absolutely. And if you know someone's making the amount that you're for the role that you're interested in, then I wouldn't think.
We did try and didn't work and didn't get a job. And this is how many times are you willing to go through this just to prove that you're as good as men? Or you just take the losses and just take the job and take the salary? I guess that's where learning how to negotiate is important. That's why I want to, maybe there are other tips.
Yeah, I started alluding to it, but I don't think I finished the sentence earlier. One of the things that, when I said, Sheryl Sandberg doesn't like giving this advice, and the advice is that often women are seen as needing to be aware of the social good of what they do, and they're seen as aggressive and too pushy. So she says you have to frame your request in terms of how it benefits everyone, not just you and your accomplishments, which is quite unfair because I don't think that men have that sort of expectation foisted on them. When you're dealing with an intermediary, that's a quite different dynamic because you're not dealing with the person who's making the hiring decision. Is that the situation you're basically talking about? Like, you're not talking about the person who's making the decision. You don't even get to talk to the hiring manager, right? Is the situation you're talking about?
I don't think we know who's hiring, right?
Right.
This is the first interview. I always ask the
I mean,
question.
maybe avoid
immediately.
recruiters then, if that's really the situation. I haven't dealt with that many myself, but maybe that's the way to do it.
I guess we are not. I cannot afford to not work with recruiters, I guess.
For our industry, if you're freelance, for our industry, if you're freelance, and that we don't want to hog the show, but for advertising, it's a lot of it is through recruiters, unfortunately,
Right.
or word of mouth. You know,
Right.
your connections and networks.
They get a fee for placing you, right? I
I would
mean,
think so.
typically, like, I have to pay when I use a recruiter as an employer. I have to do that. So you'd think that it'd be in their interest for you to get the highest gross amount, so they get a net fee that's also a percentage higher. I mean, I think you just have a frank conversation with them, right? You guys have aligned incentives. Actually, the more you're paid, the more their fee is. I assume, unless they're working on a flat fee basis. Anyone else?
I have a question for you. Okay, from an economist's point of view, there are two ways of looking at the pie.
Right.
One is distributive, the other is interest-based. And could you explain that maybe a little bit, and how men tend to look at the pie, I'll say distributive, as being one size and non-changeable, and therefore we must divvy it up?
Right. I guess the idea is that it's a zero-sum game. If I get paid $100,000 a year, then you're out $100,000 a year. Whereas if I make less, then if I make 95, then you get an extra 5. That's sort of the zero-sum pie distributive way of looking at negotiating. The other way of negotiating, framing your negotiation, is to talk about how, well, there's two things you can do. You can talk about delivering results so that the pie is bigger and that you only get paid more, for example, a larger bonus. You can make more of your salary or total compensation negotiation around your total compensation as opposed to just the salary. So, you know, if we can, you can talk about KPIs that you're expected to deliver, and then if you do deliver on them, having a bonus sort of tied to that, as opposed to a fixed bonus or a salary that just assumes that you're going to accomplish these things. So that's one way of sort of making the pie bigger in your negotiating
Thank you.
process. Yes.
This isn't about salary, but more about negotiating work-life balance. So I'm just curious as to what your advice would be if you worked in a small place where there's not that many bodies. So when you're asked to work overtime or work weekends, you're kind of put into a corner because
Right.
there's not that many people. It's not like you can easily say, well, this person will cover for me, but it happens frequently. Like, what would be your best advice to kind of negotiate?
And this was
that
not
situation?
part of your expectation when you started working there? I'm just asking because I think that's an important framing of.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that. I also work in advertising, and it's like a theme in advertising. I think I went in with the expectation that, like, I mean, that is the industry. It's like you're going to have some nights that
Right.
are like late nights and work week. That was the expectation, but not like every week. So let's
Right.
just say it's happening like so. I think I had to some degree an expectation, but not fully.
Well, I mean, I think you should and have a right to, as a human being, as an employee, and I think your employer would also want to know that you're not very happy with the situation because the way I look at it is, I also have a small company. I'm not in advertising per se, but
Yeah.
I would want to know if my employees were unhappy because they felt that they were working more than they had expected to work or had signed up for. And because they might lose you, right? Ultimately, you don't want to get to the point where you just think that your only choices are walking away or staying. And I think if you don't have a conversation, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice and them a disservice, and not at least trying to just communicate your your unhappiness with the situation. So in terms of negotiating it, besides just venting, I think you go with sort of a plan or a proposal, a counter proposal. So if it's every weekend and you feel like that's unreasonable and unsustainable, maybe it's like, well, I can work, you know, in a pinch 1 weekend a month overtime, and maybe I should get paid more for it if I have to do more than that. I mean, whatever it is, I can't, you know, the details are, you know, unclear. But I think you have to express yourself, but not make it, to make it a negotiation, it can't just be expressing your feelings. You have to have a plan for what you propose instead.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Two things. One, I know this isn't my presentation, but I have had to deal with that as well, work-life balance, and I am someone who doesn't really ask for it, in like, I just started saying, I can do this by this time. This is the only time I have, or, you know, I'm free from 4 to 5 for this meeting that you're asking for last minute. If that works for your schedule, great. I'm here for your team, whatever you need. These are the parameters. And a lot of times it's like, well, that doesn't work. But sometimes, and more often now that I'm doing it more, they sort of start respecting that you're setting these boundaries. So it's really what I learned for myself. I don't work in advertising, so it might be a little different. But what I learned for myself is I just need to say, like, that doesn't work, but this is how it does work. And like, can we sort of negotiate that with both our schedules, so it's not just one person sort of winning in that situation. Right. The question I had was, I know this wasn't your quote, but how do you sort of frame how it benefits everyone when you're like, well, if I get paid more money, I'll be happier, so I'll work more, and I'll feel valued, and then I will trickle that down into my staff. So, like, really it benefits everyone, but that's not really what the CEO is looking for. Like, I don't know if you can answer this, but...
Well, what role do you work in? Do you mind my asking? Well, because I can tell you what, in the specific case that Sheryl Sandberg gave as the anecdote, she was like, I'm going to be making deals for you, Mark Zuckerberg at the company, and you want me to be a good deal maker, right? So you'd hate to see me not negotiate well on my own behalf, because what would that mean in terms of my performance for you?
Right.
I mean, but that's a very specific example, so I'm interested in what you do. Maybe we could think
Sure. I work at a nonprofit, and I'm the director of communications. I have a 4-person staff, and we are the department that churns out the most products and deliverables, because people are finally sort of tapping into that communications is important. Right. So
it sounds like you are really public facing and the face of the company in many ways. And don't you want a happy face? You know, representing what this nonprofit is. I mean, I think for every role, there's a sort of different take on it. In some cases, maybe it's just reminding them that this is not just about your own self-interest, but that you're trying to make something sustainable work for. It's a partnership, right? An employee-employer relationship or a company-employee relationship is a partnership. And it doesn't really work over time if one of the parties feels like they're getting shafted. So really, it's about bringing the best version of yourself, the happiest face to the public, going above and beyond and feeling really good about it. And I think you can walk in saying, I really want to, when I feel good about this job, I'm going to give it 110%. But I need to feel good about it. And that maybe means that I'm not available from 5 to 6 on Fridays because I have to do this thing.
Right.
And that hour really means something to me, but I will deliver for you in other ways, X, Y, and Z.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alethea Chang Fitzpatrick. Some of the language, similar to what you said, I just wanted to share language I've used in negotiating is like, this is what I need to do my best work. Yeah. And so it's hard for someone to say, well, I don't want you to do your best work, so right. We're not going to give that to you. Another thing that we were talking about is, I think as women, we're conditioned to people please and to caretake and to worry about other people's feelings. I think some of the anxiety about negotiating is like, well, what if they, what if they say no? They're going to be, like just the idea of upsetting someone by asking for what we need. So I think that's a good thing. And as you said, like the bias is real in terms of what women can face if they negotiate. But I've also found that you can't control other people's feelings, so you can't control how they're going to react ultimately, but we can control how we react. So if a negotiation doesn't go how we want, like it doesn't have to get weird. Like if we don't make, like we can choose not to make it weird. And I've also learned a good technique is to go in with gratitude and to say, I really appreciate the opportunities that you've given me. The parts, like you want to try and do that before you're at the point that you're so angry that there's a point of no return, but to tap into the gratitude and then make your ask and then also end on gratitude. So there's a couple of things that come up.
I mean, I think also a big part of negotiating that sometimes I don't hear enough about is really try to understand who it is that you're talking to. I know that's harder in a situation where you're negotiating a job offer from one you don't know, but in the case of an existing manager, you probably know them and what they think of you, what they think of your strengths and your weaknesses, and I think sort of saying that you can only do your best work if you have certain things will not be a surprise to someone that you've actually worked with for a while. Like they know what makes you tick probably. And so you're just sort of reinforcing to them that your priorities matter.
So I do have something that I've learned, a few years ago when I was negotiating is really take the emotions that you have, like you might be angry or you might want something really badly, and take that out of the negotiation. Because it is a business. Like, I know women, we get all very emotional about what we want and we get angry. I think taking that out, I think that's something that I learned while I'm negotiating. So I have a question. So you're negotiating for a promotion with your boss, right? But what if your boss isn't the person that can make it happen? It's not like he didn't want to make it or he or she didn't want to make it happen for you. It's you work in a corporate world. He's also an employee to someone.
Right.
So how do you make sure someone is advocating for you and have the right tools to sort of take your request up the ladder?
Right. Such a great question. So many decisions about our careers are made when we're not in the room, right? And someone else is making the case or describing. I mean, I think one way around it is a longer term thing. You have to go meet the people who are going to make the decisions and try to build relationships with them directly. It's not like going around your boss, but you're just trying to meet people who are in leadership positions of the company. So that's sort of what the whole concept of sponsorship is and why women need sponsors in particular in the workplace. So I think it's not a short-term solution, but this is something that if you know from day one that your boss can't make that decision alone, you need to start cultivating your reputation and the relationship with the people that are going to help get what you want done. And that takes some time. I mean, you can also potentially, depending on the relationship between your manager and your manager's manager, you can offer to do it together. That's not if an employee asked me to do that with my manager, I'm not sure I would say no. It depends on the situation. Well, thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts. I hope we have a challenge for you. We'd love to hear your stories and successes in your future negotiations. So we'll send you a tote bag and some chocolate if you write in with a story about a recent win anytime, and just mention take the lead and that we invited you to take this challenge. And you can also, we'd love for you to sign up for our newsletter. We send out 2 times a week career advice that's been crowdsourced. We have a bunch of amazing women and men who are career coaches who write on topics that like this one. And it's free to sign up. If you just text it on your phone, you can sign up that way. And we'd love to hear about your negotiation wins. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We hope to make our dreams come true now with our own fairy god boss. Thank you.